Hello everyone, and welcome back to Game Easy, Roll Good. Have you ever wanted to do up to 6 attacks in one turn without expending any possible resources, with a big asterisk of in the right situation at least? That's what we're going to look at in this video. A pretty unserious video, just something I was kind of toying with over this last week when I was looking at different sort of character builds. Not necessarily trying to make anything that's super optimal or trying to do the most possible damage or whatever, but just really just seeing how many attacks can I do in one turn without having to like specifically go for like the Echo Knight, for example, that has a limited number of extra attacks that they can get, those sorts of things. I know that Heroes of Faerun just dropped, so expect to see more videos about that in the future, especially considering all the final versions of the subclasses that we saw in the Unearthed Arcanas, as well as the new circle spells and other mechanics that might be in that book. But today, again, just a very kind of light, unserious video. How many attacks without expending any resources can we fit in one turn? And probably this can go further, but today we're just going to look at it like this. So considering that we're looking at a sort of a build, I do want to kind of touch on, our species and background options as I usually do. So let's get started with the species. And I think the most sensible choice here for our purposes is going to be the Bugbear. So Bugbear is the most sensible choice for me because one, we want reach on our turn specifically, but we aren't going to be using weapons with reach. So the long-limbed feature of the Bugbear is perfect for that. And that's the main reason that I'm choosing the Bugbear, mainly for that little bit of extra reach. We only need that extra 5 feet. We don't need more reach beyond that. There are maybe situations you could come up with where having even more reach with a reach weapon could be good, but this is good enough for our purposes. They also, of course, have the surprise attack feature that allows you to do 2d6 extra damage on each hit against creatures that haven't taken their turn in combat yet. That's, again, just icing on the cake. The Bugbear is a very popular species for that kind of explosive damage if you're trying to optimize that way. But really, we're just after the long-limbed feature, and we'll talk about why a little bit later. I would say maybe a runners-up for this build could be the Thri-Kreen, because we do need to switch weapons frequently. So if you have a DM who doesn't like the whole weapon swapping that was introduced in 2024, but somehow also is allowing Thri-Kreen in maybe a non-Spelljammer setting, then this could be another option for you because you have your secondary arms that can hold light weapons and your normal arms can hold heavier weapons. So that is certainly also a pretty decent option just to make your life easier that way. Otherwise, really any species will do. There are plenty of good choices. You don't need to be either of these. It'll just kind of limit your opportunities to kind of really go all out in the right situations. So for the purpose of this, we'll just consider that, okay, we're a Bugbear. We'll hold that in the back of our mind. Again, doesn't matter too much, but it does give us the best opportunities to do the most damage whenever we can. So that's the species. Let's go ahead and take a look at the backgrounds. So the backgrounds, again, really sort of inconsequential for the build specifically. However, since we are a Bugbear and we have the surprise attacks feature, which wants us to go early in combat, if we are only limited to the backgrounds that are available in the 2024 Player's Handbook, I would probably choose Guard. We do want to primarily focus Strength, and it also comes with the Alert feat, which again will help us go earlier in combat, either by just having a higher initiative bonus, or if we roll low and someone else in our party rolls really high, we can ask possibly to switch with them so that we get to go first and do the most damage with our surprise attacks. It also comes with both athletics and perception, and we will have both decent scores in both strength and wisdom. So even though athletics maybe doesn't have as much value as it did pre-2024, it's still a decent skill to have just because we are focusing on strength. I would say runners up as far as backgrounds go. Again, if we're limited only to the 2024 Player's Handbook, Criminal also comes with Alert, but the ability score increases at level 1 only apply to Dexterity, Constitution, and Intelligence. So if you rolled stats and you rolled like amazing stats or maybe some weird stats and you need bonuses in different places, it could be worth considering taking the Criminal over the Guard. If we don't care about Alert at all, we still do want to focus on Strength, which would leave the Artisan for the Crafter feat, Entertainer has Musician feat, Farmer has Tough, Noble has Skilled, Sailor has Tavern Brawler, and Soldier has Savage Attacker. I would be a fan of probably either Entertainer if I want to be more party utility, Farmer for Tough is really good, or if you just really want to go all out on damage, even for the smallest increases in damage, Soldier for Savage Attacker would be really good as well. Outside of the Player's Handbook, again, I haven't looked at the new backgrounds that are available in the Heroes of Faerun book, or at least not at the time that I made this video. Outside of the Player's Handbook, the Ruined background from the Book of Many Things has the Alert feat as an option. You can choose from one of 3 options, all of which are now considered Origin feats, so we could choose Alert from there, and it would still kind of be up to your DM as to how you would assign your level 1 ability score increases. Technically, there's some guidance within the Player's Handbook as to how to manage older backgrounds pre-2024, but ultimately that would still just kind of be up to your DM as to how that would work out. So those are your options. Again, sort of inconsequential, but just still something we'd want to consider, and that's just kind of where my mind would be when approaching this sort of build, at least specifically when using the Bugbear. So that's the species, that's the background. Let's look at some starting stats. We're actually going to be looking at 2 possible builds, basically a low-level build that requires at least level 5. We do want to focus on strength still in this one. We are going to round off our dexterity to 14 just to maximize our benefit from medium armor. armor. We're putting points in wisdom here because we will be going into a wisdom based class, but technically since this is a single class build for the low level build at least, those points in wisdoms can technically go anywhere where we don't need to meet any multi-classing requirements, but these are at least the stats that I would choose. And then we will also look at a higher level build as well, which basically comes online at levels 8 or higher. Again, our goal here is to focus on strength, and then we're going to meet the minimum requirements for multi-classing. And technically there's 2 points in left over if we're using point buy that you can really put anywhere. I place them in Constitution here. And honestly, this stat spread might look a little strange because we have so many odd ability score totals, right? Our strength is 17, dexterity 13, con 15, and wisdom is also 13. Normally you'd want to round as many of these things to the next bonus, as often as possible, especially for your dexterity and con. That helps our initiative and our hit points and things like that. But especially if you're in a longer term campaign, having a lot of these odd numbers can really be beneficial, especially if your DM gives you like random stat bonuses out of nowhere, either through like an in-game item or maybe like a level up perk that give you like a +1 to a random stat or something like that. Having more odd numbers in your strats can actually be pretty beneficial. And also in these longer term adventures, especially if you don't quite know what you're getting into, it gives you the opportunity once you max your primary stat to kind of understand what the context of the campaign is, what stats are really going to be most important to you, and then make a choice as to do you want to continue to pursue, dexterity, constitution, or wisdom, and make that choice from there. So that's our species, that's our background, these are our starting stats. So we're going to start again looking just at the low level build. We're basically only looking up to level 5, and we're really only looking at level 5 because that's when everything really comes unlocked. Let's take a look at that low level build and what is it that we're actually doing here. So starting off, we're going to start with the ranger. We're looking at each important choice that we're making at each level. We're choosing the Nick mastery, presumably with the scimitar or any Nick weapon, and we're also going to choose the great axe for the cleave mastery. You can technically choose anything other than cleave at this point. You don't need to choose cleave, although at level 5 that's what we're going to be doing. As far as spell choices go, those really don't matter for the purposes of this build, and something like Hunter's Mark technically has a lot of conflict with what this build is trying to do because it will conflict with your bonus action, of course, and in a lot of situations we're not going to be attacking the same target, so Hunter's Mark is also devalued a lot in that way. But still, in like a pure single target fight, of course Hunter's Mark will still be worthwhile, especially at these lower levels. So moving on then to level 2, we're going to choose our fighting style. 2-weapon fighting generally gives us the most value, at least as far as the strict damage numbers go. For the subclass, we're going to choose the Hunter subclass, which we've mentioned previously when we've covered the Ranger subclasses, that the Hunter, at least in the 2024 Player's Handbook, probably got beat the most with called the ugly stick, I guess. The 2024 version does have some things going for it in the way that you can switch out your styles on a short rest, but that first subclass feature does give us a lot to work with, and it is very important to what this build is trying to do. So we're just kind of stuck with it, and honestly, we're happy to have it. I've kind of alluded to builds like this in the past in my previous videos, but we'll continue on to level 4. You can either take Great Weapon Master or the Dual Wielder feat, because in the ideal situations, we're kind of doing both, and it's really going to be up to you. Generally speaking, Dual Wielder will probably give you the most consistent results in terms of always having that bonus action attack available. When you make an attack during your attack action with a light weapon, you get that extra bonus action attack, since we're moving the light weapon property attack to our action with the Nick mastery. So that is probably the most consistent all-around damage increasing feat in every situation. However, in the best case scenario for this particular build, when we're able to make the greatest number of attacks that we can, we're going to be making most of those attacks with the heavier weapon. So then in those situations, Great Weapon Master will give us the most benefit. Not only that, but the Hew ability, the HEW Hew ability from Great Weapon Master here, the one that allows you to make a bonus action attack on a critical hit or when you drop an enemy to 0, that can actually be made with any melee weapon. It doesn't specifically need to be a heavy or two-handed melee weapon, it's just any melee weapon. So if you're using one of your light weapons when you make a critical hit or when you drop an enemy to 0, you can still use the bonus action to make an extra attack with that specific weapon using this feature. So the Heavy Weapon Mastery feature that gives you the bonus damage equal to your proficiency bonus during your attack action, that only applies to heavy weapons, but the bonus action attack from Great Weapon Master applies to any melee weapon that you're attacking with. And since this build is trying to make as many attacks as possible, that is technically just more chances to crit, or also just more chances to drop an enemy to 0 within a given turn. So compared to other builds, this might have even more opportunities to get that bonus action attack on more turns than normal. Basically, in our best case scenario, we're making 5 attacks during our attack action with, again, expending no additional resources. And even if we're only critting on a natural 20, that is a 22% chance to crit at least once during our attack action to then open up that bonus action attack, assuming that we don't drop a creature to 0 within those 5 attacks. So then the question becomes, how are we getting those attacks? What are the mechanisms that are at play here? And if you've been following along, and if you are someone who likes to create builds, you've either probably come up with something like this in the past, or you kind of know where I'm already going with this. So we're working with 3 specific features that grant us an additional attack in certain situations. situations. The first, of course, here is the Nick Mastery. We know it, we love it. It moves the light weapon property bonus action attack to your action. You get 1 free extra attack during your action. We're also looking at the Cleave Mastery based on the Great Axe. When we hit a creature, we can hit a creature within 5 feet of them with an additional attack, and this additional attack does not use our ability modifier for damage, so we just do a slightly less damage when we cleave this way. We can only do this once per turn. And very similarly, again, we took the Hunter Ranger subclass. This one gives us the Horde Breaker feature, or the option of the Horde Breaker feature, but it does have its own limitations. Similarly to Cleave, you need to target an additional target that is within 5 feet of the creature you just attacked, and also has a stipulation that you can't have attacked that creature already this turn. You do get to add your ability modifier to the damage, but that creature cannot have been attacked by you already this turn. So there's really just simply sort of an order of operations that we'll get into, but these are the 3 mechanisms that we're working with. So like I said in the beginning, there's kind of a big asterisk that this isn't going to be happening all of the time, but we do have some requirements, at least 2 enemies within 5 feet of each other that are also within our reach, which is why we wanted to be the bugbear, to make sure that we have that 5 feet of extra reach. So if, for example, we have 1 enemy in front of us and then another enemy is like behind them or sort of off to the left of them, but behind them like 10 feet away from us, we can still reach them on our turn. We can reach all the spaces within 5 feet of a medium-sized enemy at least. Once you get maybe up to huge and gargantuan creatures, you might have more trouble without positioning properly, but pretty much any melee user is going to have trouble in that situation. And we also want specifically level 5 because we do want access to extra attack, simply because of the way that the weapon swapping rules work in 2024. We need to have enough attacks to make sure that we can get every weapon out when we need to. Technically, the dual wielder feat can probably make this possible without extra attack, because you're able to draw or stow 2 weapons when you can normally draw or stow 1. But just for the purposes of this demonstration, we're just saying we're at level 5. And even with this asterisk that we do need to be in this sort of perfect situation where we have 2 enemies within 5 feet of each other to do the most amount of damage that we can do, or the most number of attacks that we can do. Outside of that situation, you're still just a very normal martial combatant. Like, you're still doing all the things that any other, hunter ranger could be doing, but you are holding on to the Cleave Mastery, which means that you're not using a different mastery instead. So there are trade-offs here, but that is sort of the price we pay for committing to the bit of being able to explode with the most attacks that we can do in the right situation. So I've mentioned that we're swapping weapons a lot, so that does require sort of a flow chart that we need to consider. So I did put that together to give us an ability to visualize it. And we actually have 2 different flow charts that we need to be able to go through. And honestly, I think this is maybe one of the more complex things about the 2024 weapon swapping rules, is that when you are trying to weapon swap aggressively, you need to make sure that you kind of order things correctly, especially considering the stipulation on Horde Breaker that we can't have attack the Horde Breaker enemy on our turn already. So let's say, for example, that we're starting the turn with our Great Axe in hand. So here's what that flowchart would look like. We start with the Great Axe in hand. We attack enemy 1 with the Great Axe. That will trigger both the Horde Breaker and Cleave properties. And because these are both triggering simultaneously, we, as the player whose turn it is, we get to decide what order that they resolve in. So of course, we need to use Horde Breaker first because we want to attack that second enemy, but we can't have attacked them already this turn. So we can't Cleave first. We want to Horde Breaker first. So you attack that second enemy with Horde Breaker. You do that damage. And then at this point, whether or not you hit the second enemy can maybe kind of create a branch here. And this is because the Cleave Mastery specifically says you need to hit with the attack with the Cleave Mastery. Technically, we still have a Cleave trigger sort of on the stack, so to speak. So if we miss the second enemy with the Horde Breaker attack, then we can still resolve that Cleave trigger and cleave enemy 2, and then we want to stow our Great Axe. But if we do hit that second enemy with the Horde Breaker attack, then we technically get a second Cleave trigger, which would then allow us to make an additional attack against the first enemy as well. So we have basically 2 triggers. I don't know technically how those would resolve, but if you want to, in the moment, make as many attacks onto enemy 1, you would want to hopefully hit that second enemy with Horde Breaker, so then you can cleave back onto enemy 1. Either way, whether that Horde Breaker attack hits or misses, whichever enemy you attack for the second time with that Great Axe, whichever enemy you attack for the third time with that Great Axe, because we had attack 1, Horde Breaker, and then cleave. On the cleave attack, we're going to stow our Great Axe. And then on our extra attack for the turn, because again, we haven't used our extra attack for the turn yet, we're going to draw our Scimitar. We're going to attack either enemy at this point. It doesn't really matter which one we attack. This will trigger the light weapon property. And again, we have the Nick Mastery. So we presumably draw another Scimitar or just a Nick weapon. Again, the first weapon that you attack with doesn't need to be a Nick Mastery weapon. It can be any light weapon. It doesn't need to have the Nick Mastery, but you aren't going to benefit from any other masteries because we don't have the ability to fit those masteries into this build. But for these purposes, let's just assume that we're dual wielding Scimitars. You draw your other Scimitar when you make the second light weapon attack, and then attack either enemy. That is the Nick attack. The final attack here, the bottom in the orange, is the nick property. And again, you can attack either enemy, but presumably you'd want to still drill as much damage into one as many times as possible. So that is 5 total attacks. That's attack 1, horde breaker, enemy 2, cleave, enemy 1 or 2, depending on whether you hit or miss and what you want to do in that situation. 1 attack with the scimitar, and then we trigger the nick mastery and we attack again. 5 total attacks, not including a bonus action attack if you have dual wielder, or if you triggered the hue bonus action attack from Great Weapon Master. So that's a total of up to 6 attacks that you can do in one turn, 5 of which can possibly be against one enemy if you hit with horde breaker and can cleave back onto enemy 1. Not even really like you're splitting damage up too much. You're basically just making 1 extra attack, and if you hit with that attack, you can still drill all the rest of your damage into the main creature. But what you notice in this situation is that, okay, we ended this with making the second light weapon attack, the nick mastery attack, against either enemy, but now we've ended our attack action with 2 light weapons in hand. We don't have the great axe in hand anymore. So how do we start this over? Well, there's actually another flowchart here for what we do when we have 2 light weapons in hand at the start of our turn. So again, starting with 2 light weapons, we attack enemy 1 with our non-nick weapon or our duplicate nick weapon, and after that attack we immediately stow it. This attack will trigger the light weapon property. We then use our other light weapon that has the nick mastery to also attack enemy 1. After that attack we stow that weapon as well. So at this point we've had our main attack, our nick attack, and then we have now our extra attack from the extra attack feature. We're going to draw our great axe and attack enemy 1 with that weapon. This again triggers both horde breaker and cleave. We of course want to resolve horde breaker first because we have to attack an enemy we haven't attacked already this turn. But then we target enemy number 2 with horde breaker, and much like the original flowchart, whether we hit or miss gives us 2 possible scenarios. If we hit the second creature with horde breaker, we then get a second cleave trigger to allow us to cleave back onto enemy 1, or if we miss with horde breaker, then we can still attack with the original cleave trigger onto enemy 2. So that's the main attack with the light weapon, the nick mastery attack, the second attack with the great axe, the horde breaker attack with the great axe, and a cleave attack with the great axe, all during your turn, with still a possible bonus action from either dual wielder or Great Weapon Master, provided that you triggered the proper effects on Great Weapon Master, which again are either landing a critical hit or dropping one of the creatures to 0. That's a lot of attacks, and again, this does require, again, very specific situations where you have 2 enemies within 5 feet of each other. And I would say the drawback to this low level build is that we don't have access to a lot of masteries. We would love to have access to the push masteries so that we can push creatures next to each other to open up these opportunities more reliably. But hopefully you also have allies who can also kind of maneuver enemies around, or maybe you can, position yourself in a way where other melee enemies need to funnel themselves towards you such that they need to bunch up and get closer together. Whether we're looking at the low level build or the high level build, the flow charts are exactly the same. So if you want to take like a screenshot just for your memory, if you're going to use a build like this, or if you're planning on using a build like this in the future, just so you know kind of what to go through on each turn, feel free to do so. It's not going to be on the next slide for the high level build. We're just going to go through the features. So speaking of that, let's go ahead and move on to our higher level build. Again, this really comes online at level 8, but we'll go through each level. Instead of starting with Ranger at this point, for the high level build, we're going to be starting with Fighter. Again, we're going to take the Scimitar for the Nick Mastery, the Great Axe for the Cleave Mastery, and then at this point we can choose any push masteries. Again, we really want push to be able to push creatures closer to each other so we can do what we need to do. For fighting style, we're still going to choose 2-weapon fighting. I just still think that gives us the most damage in most situations, especially if you're using the dual wielder feat. If you're not using the dual wielder feat, maybe you'd consider, if you want to increase damage, specifically great weapon fighting, although that's a very small, very marginal damage increase. There are no important choices to make at fighter level 2. Again, F2 just means that it's a fighter level and your character level is 2. So level 3, we're choosing our fighter subclass. You can really take whatever you want at this point. There isn't really any fighter subclass that I'd say is necessarily better than the rest as far as maximizing attacks. Obviously, there's the Echo Knight that gives you a limited number of extra attacks, but that's not the interest of this build. Again, we want resourceless attacks. If you're looking at only the player's handbook subclasses for the fighter, I would say either the champion or the battle master would probably be very good options. Again, the battle master is just generally very good for the fighter, but also since we're making so many attacks in one turn, that's just more chances to crit. Having that increased crit range from the champion fighter is also very good. It might not technically be the most optimized for the most damage, but if you are making a ton of attacks, having that increased crit range is very helpful. It also gives us eventually another fighting style at fighter level 7. We're already going to get an additional fighting style when we take our ranger levels again, but that's basically a third fighting style, which would allow you to pick up, a defensive or utility option rather than just focusing on ones that increase damage. The only thing I'd probably suggest not doing is maybe Eldritch Knight, possibly even Psy Warrior. I think that save DC is also based on your intelligence. Because we are multi-classing into ranger, we're kind of dumping our intelligence. You could technically technically choose Eldritch Knight if you really wanted to and just not use spells that require spell attack rolls or saving throws or just are based anywhere off of your ability modifier. But again, unless you rolled great stats, you're not going to have a great intelligence with this build. At level 4, of course, we get our feat. We're going to take Great Weapon Master or Dual Wielder, whichever one you feel fits your playstyle better. We'll take our 5th level in Fighter, and then we'll switch to Ranger at level 6. So we are a character level 6, Ranger level 1, Fighter level 5. Taking our 2nd level in Ranger at level 7, we pick up our next fighting style. You can pick up Great Weapon Fighting if you want to marginally increase damage, or you just pick up any other fighting style as well. Then at character level 8, Ranger level 3, we'll pick up the Hunter subclass, of course. At this point, you're basically completely online. You can go completely through that flow chart we had in the early level build, just as we would before. But if we continue on from here, again, we switch back to Fighter at character level 9, Fighter level 6. We get our additional feat, so we can pick up Great Weapon Master or Dual Wielder, whichever one we didn't choose before. This at least gives us a guaranteed bonus action with one of our weapons every turn, as well as giving us the extra damage from Great Weapon Master and the possible bigger bonus action attack. And then we can kind of jump to character level 11, Fighter level 8 when we get our additional feat or ability score increase at this time. And at this point, we'd probably want to round off our strength because we have a 19 strength. We want to get that up to 20. I would say Sentinel works very well with Cleave by opening up a very reliable reaction attack, which works very well with the Cleave mastery. So any turn that we end with the Great Axe in our hand and we trigger that Sentinel attack, we can possibly trigger that Cleave attack onto another enemy within range. Technically, because we're a Bugbear, we do have a limited range on our reaction because it's no longer our turn, right? We don't have the same reach that we have with the long-limbed feature, but still Sentinel and Cleave are a very good pair. And so if you are going to pick up Sentinel at this point, you might want to trade your Cleave mastery with the Great Axe for, I believe it's the Halberd or the Glaive. I think it's one of those two. Whichever one of those has the Cleave mastery to give you that extra reach on your reaction. So as you can tell, this build is very feat hungry because we're kind of trying to get the best of both worlds with both Great Weapon Master and Dual Wielder. So the Fighter levels make the most sense to me because they get all of those bonus ability score increases or feats at multiple different levels that other classes just don't get. Not only that, but once you get to Fighter level 11, which would be around character level 14, that gives you 1 extra attack during your attack action, which just, that's up to 6 attacks during your attack action, assuming you don't even action surge, which you've had once per short rest since level 2. Now, I would also say another consideration for a non-2024 subclass would possibly be the Cavalier. This one has a limited use bonus action that's like an empowered bonus action that's done with advantage and does extra damage equal to your fighter level as well. You can use that a limited number of times per day. I think it's like equal to your strength bonus, especially if you're not using the Dual Wielder feat early on, or maybe ever if you're just not using it. You can just use that to fill in bonus actions where necessary. And the Cavalier also just comes with a lot of sort of party support or party defensive bonuses as well. And even at higher levels gives you the halt feature of the Sentinel feat, where it allows you to drop a creature speed to 0 when you hit them with an opportunity attack. Not only that, but allows you to make an opportunity attack against creatures when they move anywhere within 5 feet of you, not only when they leave your reach. I stopped at level 11 here because there really aren't any more important choices to make after level 11 for the fighter. I mean, there are other feats you can take, but there's nothing that really is expanding upon this build any further necessarily. At this point, I would basically just continue with levels in fighter. However, if you want to maybe squeeze out a little bit of extra damage, 1 or 2 levels in barbarian, if and when you can afford it, could also be pretty good. Not only for the defensive abilities of rage, being able to resist bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage, but also the rage damage bonus applying to all of our attacks, as well as the reckless attack at level 2 having on-demand advantage would also work very, very well. So that's really just it. That's basically the build that I wanted to throw out here. Again, it's very unserious. Obviously only works in very specific situations. There's probably ways you can take this even further just by milking all the possible free extra attacks that exist within 5th edition. I know there's like 1 or 2 that exist that aren't mentioned here in this video. Maybe that's something that I'll look at in a future video to kind of just meme it a little bit further. Obviously that would require just a much higher base level to start functioning, but just to see like what is possible as far as how many resourceless extra attacks can we manage. Just might be a fun little thing to do, but for sure we're going to start looking at the Heroes of Faerun book and what's offered in there in our future videos. I'll be digging into that over the next week at least. So that is it for this video. Let me know what you thought of this little kind of fun build here. Again, the point of this build isn't really damage, which is why I didn't include damage numbers here. We're just again trying to milk the most number of attacks. That is the whole point of this build. Let me know what you thought, or if you've done anything similar in 2024. I'd be interested to know that down in the comments below. And again, while you're going down to those comments, please hit that like button. If you are a new viewer or returning viewer to this channel and you like what you saw here and you want to see more from me, please consider hitting that subscribe button and support the channel. I release videos every Wednesday, so you always have something to look forward to. I appreciate your time, and I'll see you in the next one.